A few months ago, I showed you guys the AB6, which is Moza's entry-level force feedback joystick system. And right off the bat, I was getting a lot of questions about how will this work for helicopters. So let's take a look. Now, if you're not familiar with what the AB6 is, I invite you to go take a look at that video. I kind of run through the system and show it in use. But in this video, we're going to take a look at the modifications I made to the stick to make it work for helicopters, and then how it works specifically for the AH-64 in DCS world. Now, the first issue with the AB6 and using it for helicopters is it doesn't have a stick extension, so it's going to be very close. You can use it as a side stick, which I showed in that video, or you can mount it to your desk in front of you. Neither of those really work to really make an authentic helicopter feel. So the first thing we need to do is center mount it, and then what we really need is a stick extension. So for that last part, it's simple, but it's going to cost you a little money. I went to Virpil and got a 20 centimeter stick extension. This uses the same connection points so that the stick that the Moza comes with and then the Moza base itself all connect. I had no issues whatsoever with making those work together. And for the base itself, now we've got to figure out a way to mount it so that it's stable, but also in front of us. Now, you might have the capability, maybe some other equipment that you have, some of those long, I don't know what they're, aluminum things that, you know, various sticks use to mount center mass on your desk. I don't like that because of my desk setup with my joystick or my keyboard that slides out and some other things I've got on my desk. So I wanted to mount it to the floor, but I don't want it permanently mounted to the floor because I want to be able to move it when I do other things. The solution for that is the patented Whiskey 00 Delta Casmo mount that I have created in my workshop, and you can take a look at it here. Basically just kind of took some scrap wood, threw it together, used the brackets that come with the Moza, as well as I think there's another bracket from another piece of equipment, but you could probably find something suitable as well. But you can see that I've just created this system that allows for the mount to be placed on the floor. It's still elevated, it's very secure. I added probably more wood than I need to just to make sure that it's nice and stable. It also helps me when I need to pick it up and move it and slide it out of the way. So the first step there really is to put the Moza together with the stick extension and then kind of figure out the sitting height, you know, where do you want it, make that measurement, and then go out and acquire, you know, your wood or whatever you're going to use to create that mount. Easy peasy, didn't take too long. I maybe made it a little bit higher than I needed to, but I can just adjust my chair. So now once all that's together, we can jump in and do some helicopter flying. But first, let's talk about why this is important. So helicopters use something called force trim. So if you're familiar with regular airplane trim, essentially you might have, let's say you're flying and you've got to hold some back pressure or some forward pressure to make the aircraft do exactly what you want to do. That gets tiring after a short period of time. So what we've developed over time is a trim system where it basically makes adjustments to the flight controls, either through hydraulics, pneumatics, you know, whatever system the aircraft is using, and alleviates you having to hold that back pressure, that forward pressure. Force trim is a very similar system in that it holds the controls in a certain position. So if you're flying a Huey or an AH-64D Delta, this is a selectable system. You can turn on the force trim and then basically move your control stick to where you want it. So let's say you want to fly forward at 90 knots. You've got to hold the stick in a certain position. After a while, that gets very exhausting. So you flick on the force trim and it'll hold that stick position. The Apache and the KA-50 and DCS have a different system where the force trim is essentially always on. So you're always having to combat that system. Now that gets a little janky in the real world if you've got a joystick that maybe you've got heavy springs or, you know, it flops around, you know, whatever the system is. If you don't have a way to hold the stick in the exact same position as it is in game, then it can get very challenging when you try to engage or re-engage that force trim to move the stick around. So essentially what's happened is your stick position in the real world and the stick position in the game no longer match. And when you make control inputs, things can get a little janky, and it makes the Apache very frustrating to fly in DCS, enough that I think it's probably turned off a lot of people from flying it, or they only want to do the front seat stuff and work all the buttons and the widgets. With the AB6, and I'm just using the AB6 as a filler for any force trim system, there's a few out there now, and I think there's more coming online. This allows you to combat that force trim disconnect, and it allows you to have the joystick match the game stick in real time, and it makes the flying experience much more enjoyable. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here we are in the Kiowa. We've got the force trim switch here, and then what I have is on my joystick the force trim interrupt switch. So essentially what's going to happen is the force trim is on. That means right now the stick, it's trimmed to this point. So you can see as I let go of it, it's going to snap back into place. If I turn off the force trim, now there's nothing holding it, right? It's a little bit of a wet noodle. It's going to go where it wants to go. And you can rig your stuff for the Kiowa to just do this without really having a force trim thing. And we'll turn the force trim back on. And now what happens is when I hold that force trim interrupt, I'm releasing the force trim. It's nice and, you know, loose. I move it to a position, I release, and now the stick wants to stay there. Not sure why I keep zooming in here. Now with the force trim on, when I use the force trim interrupt switch, you can see it click in right there. It's releasing the force trim. It allows me to move to a position and it'll stay there. And now as I try to move the stick, it's going to go back to that trimmed out position. So this is what a force trim or a force feedback system is going to allow you to do. And you can see that it's mirrored here on the real screen. So let's jump into the Apache and we'll take a look at that. All right, so we're in the Apache, and as we can see, there is no force trim button to turn it on because the system is always on. And as you can see here, the stick is moving, it's going back to its original position, but that's matched here. Now the challenge you have if you don't have a force feedback system is, and there's some ways to alleviate it with software settings in DCS, but I've never found it to be perfect, is the fact that in game, if I interrupt the force trim and move it, and this is how I should fly the Apache, right? So the stick's going to stay there, but in real life, my stick would come back, and you can see that there's a disconnect between, obviously you're not seeing it now in the crotch cam and on the screen, but, you know, in real life, my stick would kind of come back to center, but my in-game stick would stay there, and so then whenever I started to make movements, you know, things just aren't matching, and it makes it very hard to understand where your controls are. With the force trim system, or the force feedback system, now the force trim actually makes sense. You can see there that I'm interrupting the force trim, I'm moving it to a position, and my stick is staying there. There's a little bit of a wobble. I actually just did a firmware update to the Moza right before I did this video, and I think it maybe kind of messed with some stuff a little bit, but still you can see the point is that the stick is staying roughly where I'm at. I gotta kind of mess with it just a little bit. Now one thing I do recommend is, and it's not a real life thing, not a real life button, but DCS added it, is to have a force trim basically recentering button. So if you look in the force trim, it's a force trim reset, and I just have that in the Z-axis here. So when everything gets janky, I can just press that and everything kind of recenters, and that's a good thing to do once you land and kind of get things back into place. But this is going to make flying the Apache much easier, the K50 as well, because it has a similar system where now I can interrupt that force trim, move the stick where I want, release it, and it's going to stay there. I think a little bit of a jump might be because of the AB6. I think it uses gears and cogs versus the AB9 that uses like a belt system. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's one of the differences. So there's a little bit of a jump sometimes in the AB6, but you kind of get used to it. But you can see now that flying the Apache is going to be a lot less kind of worrying about where your controls are, because what's going on in real life is also happening in game. So we'll just pick it up, we'll fly around for a second, and I'll kind of show you that it's basically effortless. It makes flying the Apache much more organic, much more realistic. Now one thing to keep in mind is it's not an autopilot system. It's simply designed to alleviate some of the pressures and some of the workload that you have as a pilot. So you can put it in and it'll sometimes kind of hold what you want, but it may not be exactly where you need it. But again, I'm not having to put near the amount of work in as I would be if I was having to push the stick and hold it in a certain position. Now one thing also to consider in the Apache in particular, you can push through the force trim, meaning you don't have to interrupt the force trim to fly it. However, there's other things that go on that are interfered. So for instance, if you don't retrim the aircraft using the way that it's designed, what you actually are not also doing is communicating to the pedals and letting them know what you're trying to do as far as a heading hold. The heading hold mode is always on in the Apache, and so by interrupting that force trim and setting things up, you're also telling the pedals essentially where you want the aircraft to be heading. Another thing, I'll just kind of throw this in, one thing I've done with my pedals is I've actually taken the springs out so that my pedals will stay in position. I don't think there's any force feedback pedals, and quite frankly I don't feel like spending a couple $100s on them anyway, but just taking the springs out, you can see that my pedals are holding their position, and I don't need to worry about that as well. But you can see that we're holding our position. The stick is where I left it. I could turn on the hold modes and do all that jazz as well, and that's going to work a little bit with the force trim as well. Anyway, there it is in a nutshell. You can see it on the crotch cam. This makes flying the Apache in particular, and really all the helicopters, just a lot more enjoyable. Now, going through the edits, I may not have explained that very well when I was talking about talking to the pedals. I can't talk and fly at the same time. It just doesn't happen. But when you're using the force trim in the Apache in particular, what you're really doing is communicating with the FMC, the flight management computer. So you're kind of telling it, hey, this is what I'm trying to do with the controls. And so it helps communicate that with the hold modes, and it doesn't confuse the aircraft essentially. So you can fight through the force trim with the Apache and just kind of fly it and just muscle your way through, but those are going to be some of the drawbacks. And so you might see some of that, ramifications in use of your pedals. Now, naturally, I'm shilling for Moza on this because they sent me this product back a few months ago, and I really do love it. Like I said, there is a little bit of a jump at certain points. I think it is because of the way that it's built internally, but you're saving several $100s, I think, between that and the AB9. And the AB9, from people I've talked to that have it, it is a beast. It uses a lot of power, and it's very chunky. This is, you could see in the video earlier that I showed, it's a pretty good size. It's not hard to mount, so I think having that trade-off, it works for me. But really the idea here is to just show the implications of force feedback no matter where you get it from, and how it's going to make your helicopter flying much more enjoyable. So hopefully I've answered those questions for you. Hopefully this is helpful, and I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take it easy.